I cannot believe I am making this video. This is insane. President Donald Trump has scored a historic, improbable victory in front of the Supreme Court. This is huge news. But here's the shocking part. Ketanji Brown Jackson, yes, DEI, Biden-appointed Ketanji Brown Jackson, single-handedly handed President Trump this victory. It is insane. If you asked me, who is the worst Supreme Court justice, you know and I know what that answer would be. It's not close. I know who it is. You know who it is. But a broken clock is right twice a day. And for some reason, that day is today. And the broken clock is Ketanji Brown Jackson. And wow. We gotta get into this. This is shocking news. I need you to stick with me. We're gonna get into all the details here. It is important you understand it. Before we do that though, if you are new here, please do make sure to subscribe down below. We've been going pretty quickly. Really wanna hit that 1,000 subscriber mark, so hopefully one of these days I get monetized. Really appreciate all the support, and yeah, let's get into it. Okay, so here's the big breaking news, and this is a doozy. In a late night emergency decision, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson came to the rescue and halted a First Circuit anti-Trump decision that forced the government to pay $4 billion in SNAP benefits. As you probably know, the US government is currently in shutdown. Essential services like the military, courts, prisons, things like that continue running. Interestingly, and this is important to this case, most entitlement programs, most welfare programs like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all those keep running and keep paying their benefits. SNAP, on the other hand, which is just food stamps, right, EBT, that does stop. There is no department of SNAP. SNAP is actually part of the USDA, the US Department of Agriculture. And it stops paying because the US Department of Agriculture is a form of discretionary spending, even though the spending for SNAP isn't. This next part is a little complicated, but really, really important. This decision was a massive win for President Trump, and it is important to understand it fully. So, broadly speaking, you have two forms of government spending. You have entitlement or mandatory spending, and you have discretionary spending. Entitlement or mandatory spending is required by existing laws. The year-to-year budget doesn't affect this. An example would be like interest on government debt, right? No matter what happens to the government, shutdown or not, that interest will still be paid. Like I said before, programs like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all those welfare programs are forms of mandatory spending. So the government shutdown doesn't affect them at all. Discretionary spending, on the other hand, is exactly the opposite. Actually, most of the government's day-to-day operations fall under this category. The spending and budgets of these operations is approved year to year. Interestingly, the military is actually discretionary spending, not mandatory spending. But because the military is considered essential, and this is the case, by the way, for all essential services, the military continues working, right? The soldiers continue having to work legally, even though they don't get paid, because they are essential workers. Food stamps are kind of unique. They're really, really weird. It's a mix of discretionary and mandatory spending. That's really unusual, and they're kind of the only example of this. The actual funding of the food stamps themselves, like of the food itself, is mandatory spending. The shutdown doesn't affect that. The money for the food is there. The reason SNAP currently isn't going out though, is that the USDA, the US Department of Agriculture, administrates SNAP. Those USDA workers are considered non-essential, and the USDA is a form of discretionary spending. So when the government shuts down, the USDA stops. So now this puts us in a really weird situation where the money for the food of SNAP is there, but the money for the administrators of SNAP isn't. Now, government shutdowns in the US happen pretty frequently for a number of political reasons we're not going to get into in the course of this video. But a lot of these administrative organizations have reserves and they have money to use in case of a government shutdown. In the case of the USDA, it's about $4 billion. The Trump administration, though, for a number of reasons, has decided that they don't want to activate those reserves. And the fight over that is the focus of this case. Okay, so I know that was really geeky, but it was important. And so now we're gonna get to the actual breaking news. This is incredibly significant, and it was a huge win for President Trump's agenda. By the way, if you're new here, this channel is normally a Second Amendment channel. If you're interested in that, please do subscribe. But I know this case isn't directly involved in the Second Amendment, but the success of President Trump's administrative agenda is very significant for the Second Amendment broadly, and anything that touches with the Supreme Court is something that we got to cover. Okay, so after all that SNAP money stopped being given out, there was a case in the First Circuit involving whether or not the court could compel President Trump to use these funds. At a district court level, an anti-Trump judge named Judge McConnell decided to force the Trump administration to use these funds to keep SNAP running. This decision was wrong for a number of reasons, egregiously wrong. The first is basic separation of powers. If you remember back to civics, the legislative branch gets to decide how much money is spent and where. The executive branch, on the other hand, gets to actually do the spending of the money. The judiciary has no power here. They have no power. This is not their job. And so this right here is where the bombshell went off. So each of the district courts, right? You have the 1st district, the 9th district, the 12th, you have all the different districts. Each of them is allocated to a Supreme Court justice. They make various emergency decisions that arise that need a quick answer. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson is single-handedly in charge of the 1st Circuit. Anything that happens emergency-wise in that district is her responsibility. So after this egregious decision by Judge McConnell, the administration appealed to her. Justice Jackson, shockingly, and I can't believe I'm saying this, agreed with President Trump. Let me put into perspective how insane this is. Justice Jackson is like the epitome of an activist judge. When you talk about Supreme Court activist justices, Ketanji Brown Jackson is the first name to come up. And she found this decision so egregious that even though she is very clearly a supporter of SNAP, everything like that, she decided to stay the order. It was completely up to her. There was no one else that voted on it, right? It's not like they convene and have a meeting and, whatever the majority decides goes. No, the decision is entirely left up to her. And this decision was so egregious that Justice Jackson put a stop to it immediately. Now, when she makes a decision like this, you know it's gone too far. The reality is we're supposed to have 3 distinct branches of government in this country. We have a legislative branch, an executive branch, and the judiciary branch. And in recent times, the judiciary has been almost acting like the legislative branch, deciding where money gets spent, who can do what, passing laws effectively, and radically changing the makeup and laws of this country single-handedly. When Justice Jackson says it's gone too far, you know it's gone too far. I mean, she's the poster child of this, and she agrees with us. This is insane. I know I keep saying it, but this is actually crazy and is not something anyone would have predicted. Now here, it is important to say, Justice Jackson's decision did not stop this forever. All that happened was she put a pause on it so the government doesn't have to pay those $4 billion out, and instead said, listen, we're going to let the 1st Circuit Court of Appeals take a full look at this. Now, in reality, nothing will actually come of that. It's effectively just a stop because SNAP benefits will probably be resumed, realistically, by the time that case works its way all the way through. But it is worth saying, just full disclosure, she didn't technically side with President Trump with the merits. She just said, that order is done. You need to take a full look at it. Then you can decide, and maybe we'll take a look at it later. Still, this is a serious principled decision. This is something I'd expect out of, the late Justice Anthony Scalia. This is not something you'd ever expect out of Ketanji Brown Jackson. And I think it shows how far we've gone. I don't want you to forget who Justice Jackson is. I'm about to play you a clip, and I know this is a little bit out of left field, but this is from a couple weeks ago, of Justice Jackson in oral arguments, essentially claiming black people had a disability. She is not the best and brightest on the Supreme Court. She really isn't, and I think pretty much anyone who's observed the Supreme Court or pays any attention would agree. But she decided, just looking at the evidence, that this was an egregious decision, and she put a late night emergency stay on it. That is unbelievable. And honestly, credit to her. Credit to her. I like to dish on her, but credit to her here. If you make a good decision, I'm not a partisan guy. If Justice Jackson wants to make good decisions, right? If she rules for the Second Amendment, I'll be the first one to praise her. And in this case, hands up. You did a great job. She did a great job. But I want to show how shocking this is. So I'm going to play the following clip. This is from a video a couple of weeks ago. A lot of you probably have seen this, or maybe you haven't. But this is insane. And I just kind of want to put into perspective who we're working with.
I guess I'm thinking of it, of the fact that remedial action, absent discriminatory intent, is really not a new idea in the civil rights laws. And my kind of paradigmatic example of this is something like the ADA. Congress passed the Americans with Disabilities Act against the backdrop of a world that was generally not accessible to people with disabilities. And so it was discriminatory in effect because these folks were not able to access these buildings. And it didn't matter whether the person who built the building or the person who owned the building intended for them to be exclusionary. That's irrelevant. Congress said the facilities have to be made equally open to people with disabilities if readily possible. I guess I don't understand why that's not what's happening here. The idea in Section 2 is that we are responding to current day manifestations of past and present decisions that disadvantage minorities and make it so that they don't have equal access to the voting system, right? They're disabled. In fact, we use the word disable in Milligan. We say that's a way in which you see that these processes are not equally open.
After having watched that, I hope you can understand why I'm so surprised. I think everyone is. I think this is a shock to everyone. This is crazy, and honestly, it's crazy in a good way. And I'm not used to saying that with liberal justices and liberal courts. The reality is, a lot of these liberal left-wing activist justices hate President Trump, and they'll do anything to rule against President Trump's agenda. That's not what happened here. And credit to her, that isn't what happened here. She made the right decision. And honestly, I had to put my hands up. Great job, Justice Jackson. I'm proud of you. Anyway, I hope you did enjoy the video. I hope that was helpful to you. If you did, please do subscribe down below. I really, really, really appreciate it. This channel's been going really quickly. I'm trying to hit that big goal of 1,000 subscribers. So if you are new here, please do subscribe down below, and I'll see you in the next one.